we are going to factor out the greatest common factor. Sometimes it's hard to look at each one of these terms and figure out which common factors they have and which is the greatest. We are looking for the greatest common factor. So you want to make sure that you take the most out possible. Here's one tool that I use to help me figure out what the greatest common factor is. I'll take each one of these terms and prime factor it. So for example, 4, we would prime factor because it is not prime. It's 2 times 2. 2 is prime and 2 is prime, and so to prime factor 4x to the 7th, remembering your variable, you have 2 times 2 for your 4, and then x to the 7th would be written out as x times x times x 7 times. That's the first term. Minus 20x to the 6th. 20 needs to be prime factored, means I'm getting it off to the side. 2 things to multiply to get you 20. I'll go ahead and write 2 times 10. 2 is prime. 10 is not, so I'll keep going. 2 times 5, and both of those are prime. So 20 can be written as 2 times 2 times 5, and then x to the 6th is x times x times x 6 times. Okay, because I'm running out of room, so I'm going to make this a little bit smaller. Hope you can still read that. And then we'll go ahead and prime factor 28. 28 is 2 times 14. 2 is prime, 14 is not. 14 is 2 times 7. 2 is prime and 7 is prime. So 28x to the 5th plus can be written as 2 times 2 times 7 x to the 5th. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 x's. At this point, in order to figure out what the greatest common factor is, we'll just figure out to see if they have any common factors at all. So one thing they all have in common is a 2, so I'll go ahead and circle that. And then look to see if there's anything else. Looks like they have another 2. All of them have that in common. So I'll go ahead and circle that again. And what else do they all have in common? It looks like they all have an x. As a matter of fact, it looks like they all have 5 x's. So I'll go ahead and circle that. That's the most they all have in common. And so if you look at what we've circled, you've actually found the greatest common factor, because there's nothing else that all of them have in common, that they all have a 2 and a 2 and 5 x's. So the greatest common factor is 2 times 2 with the 5 x's, which we would write as 4x to the 5th. So to factor out the greatest common factor, you would write down the GCF, and then in parentheses, you write what's left over. So the GCF we already identified is 4x to the 5th, so we write that down first. Always have to write that down. Open parentheses, and then we need to figure out what's left over. If I were to divide 4x to the 5th out from this term here, you have to figure out what's left over. Now some of you may be able to look at that and just see that there's an x squared left over. The nice thing about this tool here in red is that you can see what's left over because it's what you haven't circled. And so what's left over is x squared. Whatever the sign is, bring it down so there's a minus sign. And then we have to figure out what's left over from this middle term. If I divide out a 4x to the 5th from this middle term, we're left with 5x. And so I'll write 5x. Next term, bring down the plus sign. What's left over from this term? 7. Close your parentheses, box that up, because you're finished. Okay? You can check your work. If you want to check your work, you would multiply or distribute. So to make sure that you factored out 4x to the 5th correctly, you could multiply or distribute that through, and you should get what you started with. If you don't, then you made a mistake somewhere.